Hey there, community. I'm Sister Leslie, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to a special episode of the Providence Podcast, a podcast offered to you through a spiritual community called Godspace. At Godspace, there are all kinds of ways to stay connected. So visit GodSpaceCommunity.com to learn more and to sign up for our newsletter. At Godspace, you can come as you are because you belong here. Godspace is a ministry of the Sisters of Divine Providence of Kentucky. So today in the podcast, we're mixing it up a bit. Instead of our usual scripture reflection, we'll do an interview about engagement, service, and working with nonprofits. I know there are a lot of people who want to get involved with making the world a better place, and God knows we need that. So we'll be talking about that today. Some of the gifts of serving, how to follow a call to get involved, whether that's full-time or even just the little bit of time that you might have. We'll talk about how to deal with overwhelm and burnout, how to figure out what direction to move into, and how service can connect you with a community of other people. This podcast is connected with a larger movement called the Podcastathon, which is a series that invites a bunch of podcasters to interview people who work with nonprofits. So thanks to the Podcastathon for inviting Godspace to be part of this. What a good idea. For this conversation, I consulted an expert, one of my own sisters, Sister Alice Gerdeman. Sister Alice has a background in education, community engagement, leadership, and peace and justice work, among other things. She'll mention her work with Ignite Peace and the Network Board, among other organizations. She's a person of many gifts and talents, someone who has graced a lot of us with her mentoring and care. I'm sure you'll appreciate hearing her perspective. If you miss having a scripture reflection, never fear. I'll post a reflection for this Sunday's readings in the show notes, so you can have it all. Now let's get started with our conversation. So here we are at the Providence Podcast doing something a little different. With me, I have Sister Alice Gerdeman, who is going to talk about her work and experiences with a variety of nonprofits. And we thought this might be a pertinent topic for today when so many people feel called to get involved in some different ways. And so we'll talk about Sister Alice's experiences and then maybe offer some advice too. So welcome, Sister Alice.
Good to be here, Leslie.
And I wonder if you could just introduce yourself and tell us just a little about who you are.
Well, I'm Sister Alice Gerdeman. I am a Sister of Divine Providence, the same as Sister Leslie, and I have been a sister for quite a few years. My basic background was in education. I was an elementary school teacher, and eventually I became a college teacher, but the community asked me to help all the sisters figure out what it meant to be working for peace and justice. And when they asked me to do that, we are now talking about the 70s, there was no place you could study it. So I had the opportunity to work with some nonprofits in order to figure out exactly what it meant, what their mission was, how to get involved, how to connect with other people. And that's been a great blessing in my life. I have worked with international nonprofits, with national nonprofits, with local nonprofits, with overtly religious nonprofits, and with nonprofits that are morally based, but not necessarily denominational religious based. So pretty much I've covered all the bases of nonprofits. At some points, I was the director of a nonprofit organization or on the board of directors or a volunteer. So my experience is quite broad.
So besides the nonprofits that we're connecting with at this very moment, the Sisters of Divine Providence, and of course, Godspace, which are the organizations that you connect with now?
Well, I'm on the board of Network, which is a Catholic social justice lobby group and advocacy group. Now they're a national group based in Washington, D.C., but with members all over the United States. And they specifically work with issues that are around the United States. I'm connected with but not on the board with Ignite Peace, which was formerly called Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center. At one point, I was the director there. And this is a group that works more or less with Ohio or more local kinds of issues. Right now, they work with immigration, they work with the death penalty, they work for peace, they do trainings, they help people get organized, etc. So I'm part of that only because I belong to committees that are part of that. I'm with the Sisters of Divine Providence, and on that, there's all kinds of opportunities to work there. I'm on a national group that works against the death penalty, specifically to eliminate the death penalty in the state of Ohio. And so that's connected to Ohioans to Stop Execution. But the organization I'm with is a piece of that and not the whole organization. Though at one time I also was the chair of Ohioans to Stop Execution. So that's one of the things that happens with nonprofits. You sometimes take different roles at different times, depending on your term and depending on what is needed at that time.
So is there, I'm guessing with the variety of different roles, is there a big difference in how you experience connecting with that nonprofit depending on the role you're in?
Well, there certainly is a difference. When you're on the board, you have definite legal responsibilities, definite things that you have to do, and it's clearly spelled out for you. If you're a volunteer, you can volunteer to do the pieces that you want. Or frankly, if you've been already involved in that organization, you can say, where do you need me? Because they probably need you. It's just that maybe not the thing that you immediately think of. Can be a long-term commitment. It can be a short-term commitment. It can be a single project that you are excited about, that you get involved in, and then it's finished and you can take a break. Or it can be something that is sustaining because quite frankly, these issues, especially the ones that are involving with the economic and political systems, are not something that you usually can finish up very quickly.
Is there kind of ongoing?
The ongoing and what's interesting to me is to think about it as, you see a problem, something that you're interested in, that you want to be involved in, and then you do some research to think exactly what is the problem? Am I seeing it correctly? What's going on? For me, as a woman religious, it also means taking it to my own faith commitment to say, what does that mean? Where is this biblical? Is this something to do with an emphasis of my religious community or an emphasis with the church, etc.? And then you pick your action, which you'll probably by this time have found several, and probably there's a group that you could be part of. At that point, you have had a new experience. Once you do, and you can go back and start the whole circle again, and each time it bumps up. And so therefore, the roles change, what you see changes, how you're able to really think about and reflect on changes, and it deepens your own perspective on people and faith.
Well, there's a couple questions I want to ask here that occurred to me. One, when you were in the leadership position of an organization like Ignite Peace, or, well, particularly that one, what were some of the gifts and challenges in that role that are a little bit different now that you're a volunteer who can pick and,
Well, at that point, the title was coordinator, and we had a staff of really wonderful people who had different emphasis that they had more or less control over. But one of the things about justice and peace issues is that they're all interconnected. So therefore, part of my job was to make sure that the interconnections happened. We also had a tacit agreement among us that the way we wanted to operate was to utilize the talents that some people had. So if you were somebody who had the kind of mind that could look at things from, say, an economic or financial bend, maybe your topic wasn't that, but that little talent you had could be used by everybody. If you were artistic or creative and posters needed to be made because there was going to be a rally or you needed something that was artistic like, well, you did it for any of the groups, not just your own. And we worked very collaboratively around that, which in one sense, I think took a lot of time from everybody. But at the same time, it kept people connected. And very often, people who, let's say, were on the committee that was working against the death penalty would hear about or recognize that we were going to be doing something to stop war or to promote nonviolence. And they'd say, I'll come. And they would see how that training would help them when we were talking about or when we were acting about nonviolence, the nonviolent actions for the death penalty.
Hmm. Yeah, so you pulled together lots of different gifts of different people.
And of course, you had to do fundraising and you had to write stuff and all of those kinds of things, which, there are times when you enjoy that. And there are other times when there's a deadline and you sit down and you say, okay, I can't do this anymore. I have to stop and do what is needed because we're on deadline. And that's just the way it is. So, while it's exciting in many ways, at least I found it that way, and challenging in many ways, and helped me find talents I had no idea were squirreled away somehow within me, the fact of the matter is there were also times when it wasn't fun because there were things that had to be done, which is the way it is in any kind of a ministry or job that people have that's worthwhile.
Yeah, true. I guess that is true in any job that we have. But I mean, just knowing you and your passion for justice and how and the ways that you can gather people, having to stop and do administrative things is, I mean, you can do it, but it's hard to be passionate about that necessarily.
That's true. It's hard to be passionate about it, but there's a great relief when you can say, aha, the budget for the year is done, and I have a little committee who's now going to help raise the funds to do it.
Oh, that is
So
nice.
that's a real nice feeling. So that's good to have.
Sure.
Yes.
And that is some people's gifts. Like
Yes.
some people like doing that.
Yes.
I am not one of those people, so God bless them.
For sure.
Yeah. So in this work, I mean, some of the issues that you've talked about that you've worked on in lots of different capacities, like death penalty work, immigration, and you talked about not necessarily seeing end results in the work that you're doing. Like you don't always get to accomplish something and check it off your list, like budget. How do you sustain yourself, like keep being passionate about it and keep working toward it when you don't see a lot of huge success or like when everything seems maybe discouraging or even just subtle changes?
Well, I think part of it is that I have a support network of people around me that want me to do it. That's helpful. The other is that over the years, you make a lot of connections. People who are absolutely wonderful people. They may not be like other people, or they may be like other people, but they're wonderful. And there's a diversity there, and that diversity brings out multiple talents. And there are people who are interested in so many things, so that if you keep a curiosity about yourself and about other people, there's a good chance that you're not going to get stuck so much. I personally have never had a time in my life when I just had, well, not in my life, in my justice and peace life, where I just had one issue that I was working on. I've always had several. And sometimes crises come pretty close together, but sometimes they don't, which gives you time to like change gears. The other is you're surrounded by these good people who very often will say, okay, we have to take a break now. We have to do a little break now because it's getting too intense. And when it gets too intense and you hear people coming up with ideas that they know aren't going to work and everybody does, you feel they're a little desperate. It's time to take a little break so that we can come together later and again do the whole process of looking over what actually will move the whole process forward. And one thing I think you have to be willing to do is to say a baby step is a good thing. Uh, I only remember one or two times when something came to an end, and I thought, "Oh my, that's an odd situation." Mostly, it's that we took a step in the right direction, or a step in the wrong direction by my own estimations, and that puts us on a different path.
So when I hear you talk about needing to take a break and needing to rest, I think that is just so helpful to know because I mean, sometimes my own tendency is to want to go hard at something till it's accomplished. But I also hear a lot of people talking today about just being so overwhelmed by issues and things to deal with and not knowing even where to go or what to do. And so, can you say a little more about taking a step back or resting or self-care?
Well, I'm not real perfectly good at it. That's one for sure. But I think part of it is to realize that there are different times in life when you have a different responsibility, and that changes.
Mhm.
So when you have a little bit of time, like you're looking to figure out whether or not you want to work on food issues or war issues or whatever it is, giving yourself the time to read and to think and to pray is very good, and it's action. You have to
Mhm.
think, okay, it's good. I'm doing an action because I will make myself a better person and I'll have something to offer wherever I land. One of the things that I remember from, and I'm not sure which one of the letters of the Catholic bishops it was, but it was one in the 80s, where they said there are two times in life when you should take time to actually work with people who have needs
Mhm.
and to work on the justice connected to that. And they said that the two prime times would be, say, right after your college or when you finish your education and before you're really sunk into your career. The best thing to do is to say, okay, whatever I'm in, if I'm in finance or nursing or whatever, education, whatever, I'm going to touch some people that have a different kind of an experience from me because that will make me better at whatever I do. The financial wisdom I can give, or the nursing care for poor people,
Mhm.
or educating the children, or whatever. So that it's part of your education. You now have a job, but you're not as intense in it.
Mhm.
You probably haven't yet started your family. So you should have a little more time to be able to devote it to helping Habitat from Humanity if you know how to hammer a nail, or volunteering with a clinic or something that maybe needs a receptionist for a couple hours. But then you see what kind of people come in
Mhm.
who have needs, needs that can't be met because they don't have the right finances,
Mhm.
or looking at children and the very different ways it is to make them feel like they're really important so that they can better absorb what's
Mhm.
going on, or how you can help them recognize that the world's not all about them. It's a
Mhm.
great big world out there.
Mhm.
The other time that they talked about it was when you get to the point where you are retiring from your career. And now you've got years of experience in something,
Mhm.
and probably somebody needs that experience. And there are groups, I can't name them at this very second, but there are groups of retired executives or retired people working in health or whatever who would be delighted to have somebody who can work with projects coming from experience or can mentor people who are just getting into that career path, and it doesn't affect the non-governmental uh, nonprofits budget to have an expert
Mhm.
that comes in however you want to work it out.
Mhm.
3 afternoons a week, 1 day a week when I'm not on vacation, but you can work it out and you can give the time.
Mhm.
The in between time, which is a pretty long time in
Mhm.
many people's lives,
Mhm.
and especially after you have it, if you have your own family, I think the best you can do is to say, this is what I'm really interested in. I cannot devote a lot of time if I have a new baby.
Right.
I cannot, if the school takes a lot of my time, I cannot devote a lot of time to it. But I can do something.
Mhm.
I can become a mini environmentalist,
Mhm.
and my kids will be happy if we can learn how to do creative things that are environmentally friendly, or we can go and look at the many birds that are out there, and to content yourself with the fact, no, I can't be on more than one committee besides
Mhm.
what I have to do, but there's so many ways to make the world a better place. And I can do that within a time frame that myself as a busy person can handle.
Yeah.
And not to beat yourself up on it, but you're also giving your kids or the people around you, if it's not children, can be the neighbors or your brothers and sisters who are also adults or whatever, giving them an example
Mm-hmm.
of how to be connected in a larger community besides themselves. Because when you're all into yourself, quite frankly, you're missing something.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's super helpful advice because I think these days there are a lot of people who want to volunteer, and some may have time. They may be at that period in their life before they've made life commitments, so they have a little more free time, or they might be transitioning into retirement years, or people who are very busy in the middle of that, but still can do something that is meaningful and helpful.
And there's also a time in life when you may have a little income
Mm-hmm.
that you could spread around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly partial to giving to organizations that don't have a lot of people who support them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're big organizations and they're little organizations, and it's a nice thing, and you can congratulate yourself if you're
Mm-hmm.
willing to spread a little bit of what you have earned in your life to
Yeah.
help other people
Yeah, that is another way to do it.
do it. Yeah.
Everybody can't, but some people can.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you're talking about volunteering and contributions, but I mean, you have done this work professionally for a long time. How did you learn how? I mean, you mentioned that you had opportunities and so you moved forward, but could you get a little more concrete about how you learned what you learned?
Well, I learned by being mentored in
Mm,
many ways. We learned by volunteering.
mm,
Now, you can figure out some things. You can join a boycott that's going on or whatever, and it's a good thing to do, but it's not intense into how to organize it. For myself, as a member of a religious community, the Sisters of Divine Providence, I was asked by my community to figure out what it meant to work for justice and peace and how our sisters in all the different ministries that we had could be part of it because they weren't going to quit teaching or
mm,
nursing or being uh, social workers or whatever they were going to be. They were not going to quit that. But how could we use our knowledge of justice and peace and our ministries to make the world a better place? And I was so blessed to have lucked into an organization that was global in its perspective.
mm,
I think once you can get your mind into a global place, and you have the opportunity to study the big picture. The little picture, sometimes, while it's an intense experience, it's not as it's not as overwhelming because you see it in a different way. Now, when I had this opportunity, I lived in New Jersey. I went to the United Nations for this organization, which unfortunately now doesn't exist anymore. But I went there. I rubbed shoulders with people from around the world.
mm.
For me, it was a mind-blowing experience
Wow.
because I'd never done any of those
Hmm.
kinds of things. And here I was learning an immense amount from people who had experience, who answered my questions, or who just let me listen. Now, I don't think most people can take a year off and do that, but there's all kinds of ways that we can find people who come into town or come to the university, who give a talk, who have written books that help us understand it. Right now, I'm reading the book Hope by Pope Francis, and he talks about what in his life led him to consider the topics that he has become prominent in and how that happened. And
Hmm.
I thought, yeah, he had opportunities. He didn't take time off. It was just people came to him or he was put into places. And I think most of us, if we look at our lives, we know that we meet people and we have experiences that if we can take a little time to really think about them, reflect on them,
Hmm.
pray about them, we will find ways to be part of them.
Hmm. I
And it
think that's
helps you
true.
not be frightened anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. The opportunities kind of emerge.
Yes.
And
You don't, you don't have to line up 10 things, all of which are necessary. And any
Mhm.
one day you could probably do that. At least in my experience, somehow one day you find yourself doing it. And then you can get involved to the amount of time that you have.
Mm.
The opportunity is there, and you say, okay. And other people will ask you to do something else. And you can either say, okay, or I'm sorry, but right now I've got my hands full, and that's okay too. And you don't feel guilty about that.
So you mentioned reading the book called Hope. I wonder if you could talk about like where you're finding your hope these days or anything else you want to say about that.
Well, I think hope is sort of a hard topic.
Hmm.
I mean, we all know we need it. And we say things like, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. And I don't think that has a thing to do with hope. I mean, that has to do what makes my life easier tomorrow or whatever. But I think hope is something that is a perspective on life that you actually believe. I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who is quoted as saying, the world has an arc toward justice. You have to believe that. And you have to believe that probably within your lifetime, you're not going to see heaven on earth. It's probably not going to happen. And that your responsibility is not to create that to happen, but to take the world just another step forward and to help other people see the opportunities that they have and to be part of that march or that walk toward a better world. Hope, I think if you had a few experiences of good things happening to you and you relish them, it gives you hope that other good things will happen. And it also, because things that happen aren't necessarily all good, if you can concentrate on the better things and try to let go of the pains or get help to resolve the pains in your life or use the pains in your life as a stepping point to help other people who may have had the same experience, all of those things then are hopeful.
Hmm.
And you don't, at least I don't, sit down and say, what do I hope about now? It's only once in a while when there's a question asked or
Yeah.
when you're reading a book that you think, oh, yeah, I've been blessed that many times I've had hope. And a piece of it came to fruition. And I'm grateful to the many people that work in collaboration about that, to the God of abundance and joy. I'm
Mhm.
grateful. And then you can move on. Justice and peace work, you have to have a bit of humor. You have to have a sense of reality, and you have to know that success is not usually defined in the way other people define it. And you have to know that the people around you are some of the most wonderful people on the planet. And some of them are quirky, and that's okay. And creativity is good. And if you can just help people in some way to use whatever talent they have, they'll be grateful and you'll have hope.
Yeah, beautiful. So, in some ways, that is maybe a good place to close because it kind of sends us forth. But I wonder, is there anything else that you didn't get to say or that occurs to you that you want to share before we close?
I think mostly I've
Mhm.
answered the questions that you've asked, but I would encourage people to find a place with people that are different than themselves, to give themselves as much variety in life as possible. Because when you start working on issues, very often it's going to be about something that you didn't think about before or wasn't your experience, especially if you happen to be somebody who is in a financial state that is not desperate, or you're a white person or whatever, somebody who has had some kind of leadership experience in some areas, you're going to find that there's things that you just don't know and opportunities to have. I mean, I think it's we're held that we should read books from different cultures, eat food from different cultures, learn to appreciate music from different cultures so that we know that cultures are good. And if you have a presentiment in your heart that people are good. They may be down on their luck or whatever. They may be caught in economic or political circumstances that are just overwhelmingly awful. But you see them as good people, and you see their children as wonderful beings that need to be allowed to mature and develop on this earth. Then you can do things with a bit of gusto that you don't have. So I think we need to open ourselves to what is around us. The world is big. It's not just my neighborhood. Love your neighbor. Neighbor means do it locally, do it statewide, do it nationally, do it globally. And one of these days we may have to do it intergalactically. You never know. You never know.
Well, thank you so much for offering your wisdom and experience and for calling all of us to listen for what we're being invited to and how we can respond to love our neighbors in bigger ways than all of us are probably doing right now. Thanks for taking this time. And everybody, I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Maybe.
Thanks. Thanks so much to Sister Alice Gerdeman for lending her insights, for her sharing. What a valuable perspective. I hope there are many things that resonated with you, maybe even challenged you. I hope you continue to reflect on all these things and maybe even to bring all this to prayer. As always, thanks for listening to the Providence Podcast. May you be aware of all the ways that God cares for you, and may we all take good care of each other. Peace.